I am Tyrell Moyd, your host here tonight. Thursday Night Conversations is the virtual Bible study of the Kingdom Covenant Ministries. We are so glad to have with us tonight Han Martin and Sean Pringle as we continue our conversation on recovery. We are just coming out of Recovery Month. But we're still talking about recovery because September has ended. Individuals' struggles, individuals' triumphs have not stopped. So we continue the conversation tonight on recovery. So for our text for this evening, we are using we're using First Samuel's is our highlighted scripture, the 30th chapter, verse 8. And it says, "So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all." So as you know, we've been having this conversation for the past few weeks on recovery. And again, my two panelists tonight will introduce themselves. I will start with you, Han. Would you introduce yourself?
I'm Han Martin, and I have been in recovery since probably different stages of recovery since I was 26.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Sean Pringle.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Sean Pringle, and I am a person in recovery. I am going into my 7th year. Wow. And I'm a certified peer recovery specialist as well, and a facilitator for 3C Recovery Training Support Institute, and a psych rehab specialist.
And I forgot to tell you, I'm 58 years old, so I have been doing this for quite a while.
Tell us a little bit about where you're serving now in recovery, Han.
Right now, I'm doing volunteer with the Light of Truth Center, and I was at cohort 4. Yay!
Yay.
And before that, I had been doing work with On Our Own in Montgomery County. And right now, I'm basically self-quarantined with my 92-and-a-half-year-old mother, and taking care of myself and becoming the bionic woman of 2020. I had my left hip replaced, and I'm about to have my right knee replaced.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much for your service to the community. And as you mentioned, even as we go through this time of COVID-19 and all that's happening around us, I think the bionic woman is not even just in those new parts, but really in the service that you're giving to the community. So I appreciate you. You unmuted, Mr. Pringle. Were you going to share something with us?
No, I noticed that it was muted, unmuted, so I was trying to get it back muted.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you. So again, for those who have been following us over the past few weeks, this week highlighting moving from preparation to action. And of course, as we've gone through this particular course, we are learning about how those stages of change and the supports that we have and the challenges that we have to overcome, how that is important to our process of recovery. So in week 1, we talked about going from pre-contemplation to contemplation, and then going from that contemplation to the preparation, where we start preparing, and again, then from preparation to action, and then moving from that action. I've started putting some things in place. That's going to be on next week, where we're talking about the maintenance. And we're going to talk to some individuals on next week who have had some sustained time in their recovery process. And even who we have on the line tonight both can share about that, maintaining after we've begun that process. And then on week 5, we're going to have a summation with questions and answers. We're going to allow those who join us every week on Facebook to be a part of the Zoom conversation. So if we do not have your email address, feel free to send us a direct message, and we will make sure that you have the Zoom link so that you can join us in the Zoom conversations with the questions and the comments that you may have accumulated over these past few weeks. So just in review, as we have talked already about again, that pre-contemplation, the contemplation, and now we're up to that preparation point. We look at that through the eyes of 2 different definitions of recovery. The first coming from SAMHSA, where it says, recovery is a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. So we know sometimes we're not living at our fullest when we are in the midst of not really taking care of ourselves. So how do we get to that point? And then the other definition that I highlight is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but the opposite of addiction is connection. So even as we have looked at Recovery Month, and the theme is really celebrating those connections, how do we connect to those individuals who are still in their struggles? How do we connect with them so that they have that bridge for recovery? How do we become a part of that connection? So in review, anything from you, Sean, up and from that pre-contemplation up into that preparation portion that you would share with anyone about your own story in those earlier stages?
Sorry, I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just I get tongue-tied with the pre-contemplate, like that. But from the from that pre-contemplation to contemplation, what comes to mind usually is the ambivalence, and at that stage, I remember still being on the fence, like, okay, recognizing that a change was needed, but unsure if I really wanted to do it or if I really could do it. And so I would think that in that part is really, and in this stage that we're going to as well, that is when you start to challenge some of those ambivalences, if that's a word. And so, you start to trying to just challenge them and start saying, well, yes, I know this needs to be changed. You start to weighing those options out. And so that's the pertinent part, I think, that can get you over the hump and to moving forward into that next stage. So my tip would be challenge the ambivalences, because they're going to be there. They are going to be sitting there and you're going to be so unsure, but it's only until we challenge those ambivalences that we can then advance to that next stage.
Great, thank you. So because we are all recovering from something, as we are recovering, literally, and we're in that pre-contemplation stage, in order to even start thinking about our change, we have to challenge some of our ambivalence. Thank you. So Hans, since Sean talked about pre-contemplation to contemplation, share with us any thoughts that you would have about your process, or anything from moving then from that contemplation, I'm thinking about it now, actually into your preparation, and what you would say about that transition.
So as I told you earlier, is that when I turned 25, that was my crises, of moment. It was I call it the birthday that made me look at my life and examine it and say, what have I done? Have I reached the milestones that I want? Have I fulfilled my mission in life? And I said no. So at 26, I was with my a college, we had a college health plan. And so I was with my provider, and she was a friend of the family. She knew my sister and she knew me. And I was there because I had allergies, and I was falling asleep in my classes because I had been prescribed a drug. And later they took that drug off the prescription list because it was found to have, they had said that it wasn't going through the brain membrane barrier, but it was. And so it was actually causing people to go to sleep. And even though it was supposed to be one of the, it was not supposed to be a side effect of this particular allergy drug. And so I was there and I was just saying, I'm falling asleep in my classes. I can't concentrate. And I literally, she's like, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. And then I started really crying because I felt like I was failing school and I was failing myself. And she said, is there something else going on that's making you so sad? And I was like, I know I need to get help. And I said, when I was a child, unfortunately, I was adopted, and unfortunately, my adoptive parents, my adoptive father was a pedophile. And I did not use that language back then. I just said I was an incest survivor. Mm. And she said, why don't you go to this place called the Julian Center? And they do a sliding scale for women and that have dealt with domestic violence. And so that was the best referral that I ever, as I said, that was a really great start. And so I did. I called them immediately, got on their appointment, and they connected me with a counselor. And 2 months into my counseling, my therapist, my counselor, the therapist that I was using at the center, she was leaving to go off to private practice. And so we were discussing what we were going to do. And I asked her, could we get special permission so I can continue to do my therapy with you? And so she got special permission to continue to be my therapist. And when she went off to private practice, I was paying $10 an hour at the Julian Center, and she honored that. And we also discussed, how could we make the best use of that therapeutic time? And we decided that an hour was not enough, especially for as long of a period of abuse and the age of abuse that was started. And so we decided to go with a 2-hour model. And so for 2 years, I had this very intense therapy session with this counselor that I really trusted. And that was a wonderful start of my journey of, as I say, I call it kintsugi of the soul. It's picking up all those pieces that were, fractured from the times of the trauma and just knitting them back together. And also knowing that there are breaks there, but seeing the beauty of how I got to where I am.
Great, thank you. And you had a chock full of great information in there. When you began, did you say crisis of the moment? How did you word that?
Yeah.
So, and the reason I highlight that is because I know when we are talking about recovery from addiction, often, especially as it relates to alcohol and or drugs, we often talk about that bottom, hitting that, that bottom, and then that's the thing that then propels some individuals forward. But in these conversations, even over these last few weeks, we don't always have to hit a bottom. So I like the framing of the language around that crisis of the moment that helped, propel me forward and, not being about a bottom always. Sean, you were going to share with us?
I love that as well, because often, and when you are in your addiction, or you have a lot of crises where at times you think, okay, this is the time, this is the time. So there's always a crisis of the moment. And so recognizing that now this one, in this moment, that this one is it, may not actually be the very bottom, but that crisis of the moment, because there are several crises that's going to show up and where let me keep it on myself, where I might think that this is the time. And the minute I either get out of that or get one more, that crisis has now resolved. And so those crises in the moment are, I love that, I'm big on language, and I love that right there, because, a crisis is, anyone's crisis is different. And so that crisis of the moment now being that one that pushed me over the edge, or telling me that, okay, this is the one where change must happen. I just love the language on that as well. I did.
And one other thing that I wanted to highlight before we get into tonight, the thick of tonight's conversation, is as you were speaking, Han, it pointed to one of my favorite sayings by, I'm about to say Monica Scott, she's Monica White now, which says, each of us have both a voice and a choice. So individuals, especially in their early process of recovery, don't recognize, first off, that they have a voice. They have a voice to, they can voice their feelings. They can voice how they think their process should go. They should have a voice in their say of how they are treated. And then they should have a choice, that not everyone's pathway is going to fit into a little box. So they have a choice in their selections. So what was the impact of having your own voice and your choice, with being able to say to the therapist, and how you all came to that conclusion that I need 2 hours? That hour isn't enough. Sometimes we feel like we have to take what we are given, and we don't even know to advocate for ourselves. So tell me about that empowering position for you to lend your voice to the choices that you would make in your recovery.
So I guess I should tell you that the very first month that I went through therapy, I lost 20 pounds. It just like dropped off, because that toxic 20 pounds was the shame and the blame and the guilt that I carried within my body. And just being able to speak the secret, and just being able to be validated for the pain, and to be told it was not your fault. You were a child. And this later, I had another therapy session much, much later in my 50s, which also she really, really gave to me that other part that the first therapist had not given me. Was she said that your body is a body, and it has natural reactions. So if there's a stimulus, you will have a certain reaction to that stimulus. And so she also took out what I call the other part of being a shame victim, is that sometimes as children, our bodies reacted to the stimulus of being sexually stimulated. And so that was a shame that I carried until in my 50s. And literally that was something that I was able to let go of. And it was unfortunate that it took that long, but I finally got that message. And so I want other people that have had to deal with sexual abuse in their childhood to know that your body can be stimulated, but that is not consent.
Mm-hmm.
And to not have shame about that. So for me, speaking up for myself was something that I had been doing all my life, even though I did not know it. And because I always felt like I was always for social justice, and I wanted to be treated equally to other people. And I think that if you are not white and you grow up in America, that you will face discrimination. You will face um, these, whether you call them microaggressions or just open racism, you will experience it just because you look different. And I'm not saying that my experience is as bad as a person that is Black. I'm just saying that we all, if you experience something like that, then I think that you are hopefully a good bearer for social justice because you've felt injustice in your life.
Yeah, and the courage, though, even from, as you were speaking, even from that minority sort of pointing view, the courage it takes to speak up for ourselves. So I applaud you for having taken that courage to speak on your behalf. So for tonight, again, I want to highlight that preparation in that action stage, how we go from that place where I'm beginning to seek some support. I'm evaluating, the pros and the cons, and thinking about what I would need in order to make this change in my life. I'm preparing for that. And then we get to that action stage where those thoughts, those things that I was preparing and putting together, then I actually become engaged in that process to improve my health and my wellness. In our congregation, as we talk about wealth, we talk about that wellness, walking in everything that the Lord has for our lives. So how do we walk in both health and wealth? How do we get to that place that, and wealth, not just monetarily, but living in wealth? So tonight, to have that conversation, again, from 1 Samuel 30, I want to start looking at verse 9 through 10. And here it says, so David and 600 men set out, and they came to the brook Besor. But 200 of the men were exhausted to cross the brook. So David continued the pursuit with 400 men. So I want to start the conversation from as we preparing and we start to put some things into action. We see here that David lost 200 men. What were some of those things that you had to let go of? What were some of those things that you needed to eliminate? Those thoughts. What are those things that you needed to let go of in order to begin to put that preparation into action? We're going to start with you, Mr. Pringle.
Yes. So first, from that scripture that you just put that you just had up there, I received something else that just triggered something else in me, and so because that movement from preparation to action was one of the hardest stages for me, and so he started out with 600 men, and by the time he got there, what was it, 400, 200? He had lost some.
No, he lost 400, so he only went on with
Only exactly. So in my process, or oftentimes I see in individuals I'm working with process, you have so much support with you or encouraging you that you need to change, you need to change. But then when you start to make that change and that support sort of decreases, they push you out there to go fend for it on your own. And you still have some of that major support, those close-knit family members there, but all the individuals around you that started to recognize that you needed to have that change sort of dissipates. So that's what I got out of that right there. But some of the things I had to let go were all the unhealthy, negative influences that were around me. But I think what actually, it wasn't, I didn't even explore the things of letting go, because by that time I didn't even have that many. I was my own worst enemy and doing things by myself. And so what had to happen for me was my motivation now had to increase. I had to increase my own motivation, and what I had to do is I had to see that change was in my best interest in order for me to now go into this action. I had gotten so comfortable living the way that, comfortable in an uncomfortable situation. And so my motivation had to increase. I had already let go some of the things. Now the vices were some of the things, the tools that I used to, for lack of a better term, kill myself. I had to let those go. The phone numbers, if you want specificity, the phone numbers in my phone that I can readily call individuals to bring me one over, meet me here, make a sale or whatever, things like that. That had to go out of my phone, because as long as I looked at those as if those were, oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll come back to it, but those were those
Enablers.
not so much enablers. It escapes me. But when you hold on to them just in case. What is that term we use? That just in case moment. Just in case what was that?
Crutch.
It's a term we use in the recovery field, the recovery world, and in the rooms, but I can't think of what it is right now. But yeah, so I had to let those go. And so the phone numbers, the things around my house, I had to do a thorough cleaning of my house. The tools that I used to use had to be let go, and things that like you would think that weren't a tool, but let's just say like a business card. I was an individual who business cards played a major part of my usage, because I would often being at work or had to have something, I could store things, fold it up and put it in my wallet. So I had to get rid of business cards. And so it was those small things like that, those tools that I used to aid me when I was using. I had to let those go with the people, individuals, and things like that as well. And so, and letting go my own fears of even trying, and so a lot of letting go was within me as well. So it's a broad array of things that I had to let go in that part to get over that fear, because it was so fearful to even move on to that phase right there. And had to learn that, okay, I can do this with or with no one else. I want this, I need this, and letting go that negative, because it's so much, the language is so important. My language now had to change from, you need to do something about this, to I have to do something about this. That language to myself. So I had to let go of that comfortable language that was always there, knowing that, okay, you need to do something about this. However, you're still doing this and you're still doing that. So now let that language go. Again, playing into that increased motivation. I have to do something about this. This is this is weighing on me. I must do something. So letting go that comfortable language, that stuck language. Han spoke on some things, and she added a third, which I'm gonna let you know that's a steal, because I usually call them the paralyzing twins, the shame and guilt. But she added a triplet in there, the shame, blame, and guilt. So I now have a triplet to that. So I had to let that go as well. The shame, the guilt, the blaming others for my misfortune and for what I'm participating in. Some of the deep trauma that I may have had that I used for excuses to continue using, that, okay, I only do this because of that. Letting that go. So yeah, I could go on, but.
Great. No, I appreciate it. So Sean shared a lot with us about both those internal and those external things that he needed to let go, and often we need to let go. So in that letting go process, Han, would you share with us how did you handle letting those things go? You know, whatever you let go, it may not have been the same list. How did you handle that emotionally and mentally? How did you handle the letting go?
It was sort of a 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But one thing that I was continuous with was that once I made the choice to go through therapy, despite family, despite people saying you don't need to go through therapy for that long, or whatever they were doing to say, you're fine, you're all right, you don't need to continue. I made that commitment to myself and with my therapist to do that for 2 years, and that we were going to be on this journey of recovery of who I was as a child, and to work on growing that child to the adult that I was at 26 and 27 and 28. And the biggest things that I had to let go of was my old coping mechanisms, my old beliefs about myself. And the other part of it was the self-sabotage. And that, as I said, it's like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But as I said, I also had this commitment to myself. And I think, as I said, it was that impetus of, I'm 25, I want to make an impact in my life. I know that I'm here for a greater purpose. And there's so much to work on in social justice. You know, how can I be the most empowered voice? And how can I make the most impact in my world? And so that those 2 commitments and choices that I made kind of worked parallel with each other to continue my forward progress, even when I would say it's hard and I'd go and I'd drink, or I'd go and have a one-night stand. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to continue and say, okay, get back. Where's my self-worth? And, you know, and that was the other part of it, is becoming self-validating rather than choosing other people to validate my value. And being an adoptee and being an incest survivor, those are all, you survive by being acknowledged by someone else. And so it's a long road, but as I say, I am now 58 years old, and my bullshit factor, as I say, I can spot it and smell it really quickly. And so I don't need people to feed my ego. I don't need to be validated, because I know who I am and what I'm about and what I stand for, and that I'm not any better than anyone else, but I have value as a child of God.
Absolutely. So that sort of inner strength that you were able to pull from, I know that in an earlier verse, which we talked about a few weeks ago, where David encouraged himself in the Lord, was that inner strength to pull from in that time natural, or how did you get to being able to look at yourself in that light? I'm worth something.
As I say that, and when I was 16 years old, I had that car accident. So car accidents are like, I would call them my corrective feedback, universal feedback. So at 16, I had that car accident. I nearly died. I was saved by, as I say, providence, and by laying on that seat to save my face, I saved my life. And at 26, I had another car accident, and that was another reason for me to start crying at this doctor's office. And so these are gifts that you can use to say things are wrong in my life, or something's not, it's not, my life is not conducive to being on a positive track if something's happening like that. It's just a way for me to say, I need to take corrective action. And so that's how I look at things in the world. Like if I have something that happens to me, I just kind of, okay, what is the lesson that I can take from this? And, you know, how can I move forward in the most empowering way for me? Not through shame, blame, or guilt, but just what do I need to learn? And how can I move forward so I don't have to have this lesson again?
Absolutely. One of our themes for Kingdom Covenant Ministries this year literally has been that self-reflection. That 2020 vision that we talk about is literally about that self-reflection. So thank you so much for sharing that. Brother Sean, I know you had mentioned you had your word come back to you. Do you want to share it with us while we set for the next?
Yeah, that word that I was so struggling with, and which is a big letting go of some of the reservations. That's what the word was. I couldn't think of that word, those reservations, those hold ons to just in case. That's what that word was that I couldn't think of. I had a brain freeze.
Yeah, letting
I
go.
had let the word go. I had let the whole word go. I forgot.
Like you wasn't even reserving the word. Let it go.
Even the word was gone. I threw it all out. The word and all the reservations with it.
Thank you. So as we move on in this particular chapter, in David's own road and journey to recovery, just a few things I want to highlight here from verses 11 through 16. And the first, it says, as in verse 11, along the way, they found an Egyptian man in a field and brought him to David. So, and then, you know, the rest of the verse goes on to talk about how they fed him and different things, but they were on their way, of course, to recover their stuff in the most likely of places. They come across this gentleman. And we'll start with you this time, Han. Would you share with me about how, or finding supports in sort of the most unlikely of places? What were some of those supports that you came across?
As I said, it was finding resources and being resourceful. And that was, you know, that primary care physician giving me this resource and saying, they do domestic violence. And so they will probably be a great source for you, since this is really a domestic violence thing that happens to children and to women. And so because was already that focus of what I really needed, that was really helpful. And so they already knew lots of the processes and exercises that I needed to do to get in touch with that angry child, that child of grief, and to feel those emotions and to let them go instead of storing them in my body. And so that's why I said, you know, that first month, I lost 20 pounds just because I was able to put into words and to be able to feel all this shit that I had stuffed, you know, since I was a really small child, because it started from the age of 4. And so at 26, I was able to speak my truth. And once I was able to speak my truth, I was also able to feel my truth and feel and be able to say, I'm angry, and to say, this hurts, and to be able to cry, and to also to be able to laugh, because part of therapy is that hopefully after you've gone through the exercise, that you're able to, on the other end, say, wow, you know, I'm alive, I'm here, I'm okay. I mean, I survived all of that. And to see the strength that you have, you know, those are all great ways to continue to support yourself and to say, I'm on the right track. And so that was, to me, so much a part of all of my own recovery, and to be able to just trust certain people to know that they were at the top of their field and that they would know where to send me. And so I've been very blessed to know, like, what's the next step? Because as I said, you know, counseling can only get you so far, but I feel like you've got to encompass that, the body, the intellect, the emotional child, but also that spiritual self. Because if you don't make that leap of faith into love and into forgiveness and into the joy and the peace that comes to just knowing that you're a child of the light.
Thank you. And I do want to remind you, Han, I don't know if you were able to read your message, just remembering our audience, so watch the language. I appreciate you. One thing that you, as you were talking about that, because in the sort of the most unlikely of places, as we are in our recovery process, you mentioned that supporting yourself. Sometimes we don't even feel like, yeah, all I do is everything wrong. And, you know, I beat myself up as we talk about that shame and that guilt. Sean, would you share with us, were there those times where sort of you surprise yourself with that new talk, that new thought? You know, because as we start changing, so Han, you mentioned, you know, losing the 20 pounds. Probably within those first couple of days, you couldn't tell the difference and look up like, wait a minute, I'm looking different. You know, you start to tap into yourself. Did you have any of those experiences, Brother Sean, that sort of surprised you about yourself as you began to make your process of change?
Yes. And so a lot of those thoughts of my own started to show up the further I had gotten into the action stage. As going, like, trying to move to the action stage, that disbelief was still there. And so my if I'm trying to get from preparation to the action, once I was in action, now I start to feeling some, because on the process of getting there, it was the outside voices, the other influences in my life that I relied on, that you're better than that. You don't come from this. You can do these things. And that encouragement was what all I had to rely on, because I didn't feel that I was worthy. I didn't feel that I could. And so as I got into the action phase, it was only then when I started to say, yes, yeah, I am. The beliefs start coming in as I start to reach more goals, as I start to getting further along and things start feeling great and feeling better, I'll say, before great. When things start feeling better, then those self-motivating voices start to appear. You know, and if I could caboose you all's train of thought back and forward, the question that you asked her about those unlikely places where I derived some support from, it was, and most of my support came from the individuals that I bought drugs from. You know,
Wow.
as they saw me walking down the street and beginning to change, they would encourage me, and they would still be out there on the corner selling whatever they were selling. But because I still had to come in the same neighborhood, we talk about changing people, places, and things, but let's be real. I couldn't pack up and move. I still live around the same people. I still may be in the same household with individuals who are still practicing. So all of that may have still been in place when my process was actually happening. And so, but as I walk through the neighborhoods going to my program, and individuals will start to see the change in me, like, oh my God, you look so good, man. Oh, keep going, man. You should don't come back around here no more. You should even stop coming around. So I start getting a lot of support from them, and because I still didn't even see it physically. I still was underweight to me. You know, my complexion was still dark. I hadn't started to acquire better clothing yet, as to speak, so to speak. And so that's where that support came from. So my inner motivation and those thoughts came later on in the action stage as I progressed further into it. I started to believe in it, but it took me having to be in a safe place to explore those feelings, because you're so guarded when you're in your process, and you're holding on to everything inside and trying to deal with it yourself. And when I got into an environment where I could explore some of those feelings and let some of them out, share some of them, then the feedback and the things that I would start to hear will start to have me saying, okay, yes, I can do this. I deserve this. You're better than that. You were taught better than, you come from different stuff. So then it was then. So having a safe place to explore those feelings helped me to actually verbalize and internalize some of those feelings and beliefs.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Which actually leads us then to the second part of this portion of the process. In verse 15, David says to this individual that he just come across, will you lead me to this band of raiders? So talk to me, we'll start with you this time, Sean, about asking for help. Yeah, you know, our pride, yeah, I'm good. Somebody, how you, I'm good. Talk to me about the process of asking then for that help as you're making your process of change.
Another challenge. I usually say this quote: the presence of pride will kill the strongest man's stride. I usually tell myself that. And so that asking for help was a big challenge, because I was always that individual who thought that I had all the answers. I could figure this out myself. You know, they don't know as much as I do. And so again, it was through actual being in the action stage and seeing others around me. And so I would start, and I think my natural inquisitiveness may let me ask for help, because when I would see other people progressing, I was always one who wanted to be doing better than or next or just as good as the person that I see. So I would be like, well, how did you do that? Well, where did you go to get that? And so that's when I start asking, you know, I think my competitiveness, if I have to say, led me to start asking for help, because trying to figure it out on my own, I would go up and bump my head so many times. But some humbleness, I had to practice some humility and humble myself and say, Sean, if you had all the answers, we wouldn't be at this process. You know, you were the last person you listened to when you did that stuff. So now, how about asking somebody else for some guidance? You know, let's ask some people, you know, how did you do that? Where did you go for that? So the eagerness, the now wanting to change, feeling a little better, getting rid of the monkey, first of all, said, okay, now that part's gone, because I felt like that was a major hurdle. Now that that part is gone, the withdrawal of the sickness, okay, so now how do I keep this? Because I had gotten here before and always failed. So now having a desire to keep it going and wanting more humbled me enough to say, you need to ask somebody, because you got this far on your own before. So now you need to ask somebody, what does it take to get from here to here? You use the phrase like, okay, I'm good. Okay, but what would it get to be great? what would it take to get to be better or best or to accomplish even more or to hold on to this? And so it was that desire that humbled me enough to say, okay, let me ask somebody something. And when I start seeing other individuals, because I went to a program, a lot of us do, and not opening up at first, but then in seeing and I mean, I don't want to call anyone's names, to break anybody's anonymity, but it took me seeing her and like, okay, how did you do that? How can I do that? How can I start sharing these meetings? So it was seeing other people's work in action, what the desire to get what they had, the humbleness and the eagerness to hold on to what I had accomplished thus far. Because I had gotten here before on my own, and now I would fail at this point. So now I needed to know, how do I do this to get from that part to here?
Great, thank you. Of course, there's a scripture that says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God and he will raise you up. So a part of that humbleness also is seen in the last portion of this. It says, so in verse 16, so he led David to them. So Han, a part of asking for the help is also then following the advice of that help that you've been offered within the 12-step community. When they talk about God, so I put on here for my notes, following God. And so they talk about God in the sense of being good, orderly direction. So as individuals are pouring into you, you've asked them then for some help, some support. How was the process for you for actually then following that advice, following those directions from those that we ask? Because it's easy for me to ask, but now, oh my God, what you gave me is too hard. What you told me to do, I don't like the answer. So tell me about then following those directions for you.
I think in that respect, I am blessed in the fact that I try my best to be a good student, and I try to learn my lessons. And so if nothing else, that curiosity and the wanting to learn has served me so well. And that has given me, as I call it, measured risks. And because I've taken those measured risks, I've reaped many rewards. I have had an incredible career because of all of these things. And in my 50s, as I said, I did a 50-year look back at 53, which was, 3 years old was when I was adopted. And I looked back on my life as a 53-year-old at what I call a pivotal moment in my life, that my life veered to a different direction. And then I looked at all the different times of crises and traumas that I had throughout my childhood. And as I said, 16, I had that car wreck, and that led me in a different direction to be really blessed and to see that I had a purpose to be here, and that, my life was worth saving. And, to go to 18 and date someone of Jewish faith, and then, opening my own view of the world and just educating myself to say, I believe in the light, and I believe in whatever it is that anyone has, whatever their faith is, that they have that genuineness. That's all I can ask, is that they be a genuine person, and that we all share love and respect, and the platinum rule, which is, how do you want to be treated? And, by asking, how is it that I can be most respectful to you. And that is my premise, and that is my value and my principles that I feel I've lived my life from, of that place of honoring. Because, as I said, being diminished just because of who I am by the instant judgment because I'm not white made me examine all these things much more deeply, so that I can be that force for good and be the force for justice.
Absolutely. And we need that force in the world today. As you were speaking, relative to following that directions, following that advice, you talked about that risks and rewards. So it reminded me of when Jesus, and I think it was Peter. Now, Sean, I'm losing it. Where Peter walked on the water. It was Peter. Where Jesus, is out on the water, and he invites Peter out on the water. That is a risk that one has to take, but the reward is having that faith to actually get out there and start to move and start to take the action. That's what we're talking about. We're preparing, and now we're actually starting to make those steps. I'll pose this question to Brother Sean, what were some of those risks and rewards? How scary was it to walk out, on that water, to take that leap of faith for you in that process of following those directions?
Very scary, because I'm a person who has to see the evidence. And so if I see him walking on that water, then I start to think, okay, well, then maybe I can do that. And him calling me out there and saying, come on, you can't do this. But if that would make me, I think seeing the evidence for me had me become more trusting, but and not to make light of that, scripture or that part of it, but I had to make sure the things that individuals were encouraging me to do fit the plans or the goals or the changes that I wanted to make. Often individuals will say, come on, you should do this. You should come on and do this. Do I want to walk on the water? I mean, not to make light of that, but if I had to put that in the flesh, is that part of my plan, walking on water? And I know that is to build my faith on that portion. But on the other side, where individuals telling me, you need to go to more, and I'm just saying, to more NA meetings. You need to go do this. You need to start encouraging and suggesting things, and I thinking, and I follow it. But then I come, okay, so now as I start to negotiate a plan for my change, so to speak, because they're telling me things to do, and I get a sponsor, and I do, and I pray, and I go to meetings, I do all the things they suggest. But then now I start to negotiating my change. Okay, I say, okay, I'm doing these things, but I want to try this, and I want to do that. And so, and I see how that flied, but I had to make sure those suggestions, in order for me to have the faith to follow, it had to fit my plans and goals, And so then when I saw you offer me something in the direction of where I was trying to go, I would be more eager to leap. But when I saw you offering me what worked for you, or a direction that you were going in, I would be more apprehensive and say, okay, that looks good and that works and all, but is that for me? Is that going to work for me? And you tell me and I see it working for you, but I want to go over here. I want to explore this or that in this. So a lot of the limitations and my eagerness to buck the system sometimes will say, okay, well, I'm not going to just do that. I'm going to try some other things. And so that also would spark me, and I like a challenge. I like to be in a learned process. And so when you're offering me things that can better enrich me, I'm more eager to do it. But if it's just some fluff or what I might deem to be like just doing it because it's what they do, and you question like, well, why are we doing this again? Well, where are we going with this? Because that's what everybody do. This what they say do. No, that don't work for me as well. I got to say, okay, it has to make sense. I'm sorry, it has to make sense to me. And so I mean, I've never been an individual who was lacking in the intellect coming through, even as in spite of what I did. And you always say, or I did what they say I did, but I'm not who you say I am. And so I'm still me. And so I had to still have it make sense and match the plans of the goals that I had for me in order for me to follow. I jump on board if you come in and say something that matched, like, wow, yeah, that's where I was going with this. I'll follow.
And I think that's so important from those who are both serving and helping others in their process, because often I want this for you, but do you even want it for yourself? What is the vision that you have for your life? Because if you don't have a vision for your life, then you will perish. So knowing what your vision is, knowing what lines up with you, helps you better connect with that. But just for, my bishop is watching tonight, so I want to make sure that we are biblically sound. So just so that you know, Peter did ask, because Peter asked, Lord, if it's you, bid me to come. So that was something that he wanted. I'm glad you made that point, because again, sometimes it's not what the person wants, but Peter wanted to be out there. So he even asked, if it's you, Lord, if it's you that's sending me out, then bid me to come, tell me to come. So yeah.
Okay, so good. Thanks, Bishop.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to leave that out there. And he said, wait a minute, a son of this house better know the word. We are rightly
and if I can add real quick, it's like the changes I want to make. And some of the things you hold on to for a while. Okay, so you asking me to change some of the things that I'm not ready to change yet. I'm not to that part yet. This is here what I present, that I am prepared, because I prepared to make this change. And you're veering me off over here to make this change, and then that scares me. And so let me work on this here before you get me doing the work, so to speak. Let me get this there before I start doing the hammer and then the nail and then the things.
Yes, what's happening in my head and my heart,
yes,
happening in my feet. Thank you. So I want to end, and so in the beginning I said, we've been leaning towards Samuel as our key scripture, but week after week, I've also been going back to the prodigal son. So just as we left off last week, or we ended with talking about the prodigal son in his recovery story, I want to do that also this week as we talk about that shift from preparation to action. So here in Luke 15, verse 20 and 21, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So here in verse 20, so he returned home to his father. So as we have been talking again and using this as our conclusion scripture every week, the prodigal son actually then began to put his plan into action. So he was talking about, I'm in this pit, I need to change this situation. He decided, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my plan. He then actually started to make those steps. So Han, tell me about that process for you of actually returning home, returning to that place of, wholeness. Yes, I'm gonna leave it there because I'm almost about to jump into next week. So tell us about your process there.
So I say that in 1995, I went and I did the thing called the Hoffman process. I had done a lot of human potential work up until then. And so had I not done that work, I don't think I would have paid the $3,500 that it was at the time to spend a week out in California, and also to spend another week as part of my commitment to myself. So I went and I committed, and they sent me this homework. It's called the pre-work, and it was 35 pages, and it was literally page after page, and it talked about, different beliefs, and whether your mother, your father, or a surrogate mother or a surrogate father, and whether you accepted or whether you were rejecting that belief. So it's literally pages and pages of literally lots and lots of different beliefs, from parenting to finance to, family to life to just you name it, it was there. And so that was how I learned all the conflicting programming that I had had, and how I could never win, because if I pleased one parent, I was probably hurting another. And not only did I have a mother and a father, but I had a surrogate mother and a surrogate father. And then I also, in my life, had also accepted other people that also sort of became like my mentors. And, people are not perfect.
What?
So there was a lot of what I call unprogramming that I needed to do to really examine what are my values, what do I really believe, and to just say I own it. And so that process of really examining my life and examining my beliefs and really going through the whole structured program of that week-long dive into myself and into and it was sort of like a rebirth, as I call it. That was the first time in 1995 that I felt truly whole and complete. No longer a broken adult. I truly felt healed in a way that I had never felt before, and whole in a way that I had never felt before, and empowered in a way that I never had felt before. And so I say that that was one of my peak experiences, besides, giving birth and, sunrise at Haleakala. I mean, there are certain peak experiences in life that will forever be indelibly, in your body, that you just have experienced, and there's just this transcendent experience. And that was one of those transcendent experiences.
Great, thank you. As you began to share and you talked about getting to that end of being empowered and being whole, in the beginning, you talked about those stacks and stacks of papers and reading and material and things. So that takes a huge commitment to the process. So the second part that I have highlighted in verse 20 is where it reads, and while he was still a long way off. So Brother Sean, in that commitment, sometimes it's still like I'm doing all this work, and recovery is still way down the line. I started making all of these changes, and oh my God, I would still never get back there. It still seems a long way off. How do you stay committed to the process when it still feels like a long way off?
I had when in that process, you minimize your scope. If I'm looking that far away, it's going to become discouraging. So I have to minimize the scope and stay here. You know, they use the term 1 day at a time in the 12-step modules for all the time. And so if I'm gazing that far ahead, it's going to make me get discouraged. It's going to seem like more of an uphill battle, but it's those smaller accomplishments that actually encourage me to go further. It's those smaller accomplishments that makes me pat myself on the back and others pat me on the back that gives me that strength that says, okay, I accomplished that. So as I'm looking for that goal all the way down there, it's a constant fight. But if I keep a goal up here and then now conquer it, it seems more possible. It seems more, I have the ability to do this now because I got that one done. I did that. If I can do that, then I can do this. So you minimize your scope, first of all, because if I'm looking all the way down there at 1,000-yard stare, I am going to be discouraged. It's going to seem too much of a fight for me. And so I had to come in and say, right here, live in this moment, think about what's going on today. Yesterday is gone, and tomorrow never comes. Because when tomorrow comes, it's today. And so tomorrow is always ongoing, ongoing. So I have to live in today at all times. I have to do whatever it is to be successful today. And then I take it the next day. Got over that hump, accomplished that, knocked that out the box, did that. Wow, yeah, I can do this. Let me set this goal right here. Each time the goals may get a little further and a little more challenging because now you're like, okay, let me try this one. I know I can do this now and I got some strength. I'm believing this now. Again, seeing the evidence, you know, having the encouragement and others seeing the change in you. You know, when you spoke of in that last scripture about going home, and I can't remember exactly what it said. And I often I get the spiritual piece of it as well. And then I also come back down into the flesh and think of, so I returned home to the father, and while he was still a long way off, you know, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion, ran to him, embraced him, and kissed him. Goes, yes, his son said, Father, I've sinned you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry, family. I'm sorry, everybody, that I've done this. I'm not worthy of that. And then having that encouragement to say, yes, you are. But returning home, is home the brick and mortar or is home here? Because this home, I couldn't return home. I had to create a new home. I had done this so long that this had become home for me. So I had to move, so to speak, you know, and create a new home because returning to this home with dysfunction and doom and gloom and pain. So I don't go to that home. I move by changing, creating new things, new beings, new experiences, taking on newness, you know, and it was a renewing, it was a renewness that had to happen. It was an actual change that had to come, a change in thinking, speaking, and behaving.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things. So now this, because I didn't think that way before. I didn't speak that way. I didn't behave that way. So that was home for me. That other way. So now creating a new home, creating something different would make me want to come back there and want to me set up shop, so to speak. Make this a livable, comfortable place. Again, that safe place, because those other places weren't safe. They weren't healthy. They weren't, and that was the home that I knew. I had practiced that way of life for 26 years. I grew up doing that. I sort of knew no differently. That was home for me. So I couldn't return there. I had to come back and say that, okay, I'm sorry that I disappointed you, that I didn't fulfill the things and dreams that you all may have had for me or that I've had for myself. But let me show you that I now have new dreams. Let me show you I have new goals. Let me show you the things that I can do now, because that past right there will hold me hostage, will be held hostage to my past. Those are things that were in that home, so to speak. And I had to get newness. I had to get a whole change and create a new space that was healthy and wealthy and well.
Thank you. And that change we see in the prodigal son. Earlier in the chapter, basically, he go to his father, he asked for his inheritance. It comes from that boastful sort of standpoint of his position, that pride. But here in verse 21, he said to, this is the son speaking to the father, I have sinned against you, against both you and heaven, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. So that was the shift for him, that change for him, really getting to that place of humility. So as we close out for tonight, Han, give us, I guess, your one sentence, sort of one phrase, our ending phrase, on the importance of that humility, part of that action walk for you.
To know that I don't have all the answers, and to know the right people to seek for the advice that and because I trusted that their advice would be beneficial for me. And so to do that homework is important, to research that that's a good fit for you, so that you're not setting yourself up for failure.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. So for you also, Brother Sean, as we end tonight, from, again, that last verse, that humble nature, what part does that speak to you about your process with being humble? I know you had talked about it earlier, and I wrote it down because, as you mentioned, that's the presence of pride will kill a man's stride. So talk about walking humbly before men in our road to recovery.
Yes, like that pride will keep me stuck. As I say, and that quote you just now said that I use, as long as I hold on to that, I will remain stuck. And so that humility empowers me to ask, to speak, to challenge, to dream, to desire, to do the work, but as long as that I have that, and it's okay to boast sometimes, but as long as I have that absence of those things that's keeping me in this place, I'm not going to be willing, because I'm going to think I got it figured out. I'm going to think I have this. I'm that know-it-all kid that thinks he can know all and do all and don't need to ask somebody, but it took a few bumps and licks and making me say, okay, I need to ask for help or ask how to do this. So the humbleness keeps me in a learning position, because as long as you're asking questions, you're learning, and asking good questions, I should say. And so that's the part that I hold on to, that humility keeps you eager to learn more. And the more you learn, the more you'll do and impart into your life. And so that's what humbleness and humility means to me, learning.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both so much for participating, being our panelists tonight. So just as we close, just a quick review as we move from that preparation, we're preparing and moving into that action stage. It's important for us to recognize those things that we need to eliminate and let go and leave behind. It is also important for us to seek out those supports. And sometimes they will come in those most unlikely of places, those most unlikely of individuals who can speak life to us. And then we're going to leave ourselves open to both asking for help and then following the directions of the help that we have asked for. And then in conclusion, knowing again that as we approach this process and any process in our lives, to keep ourselves in check, So that's that humble nature as we approach this process of change. Right before we go, I do want to again just a quick word of prayer. Dear God, we thank you for those who have joined on both this call and on Facebook tonight. We bless you for the recovery that we are seeing transformed in our lives and in the lives of those around us. We are ever so grateful for all that you are doing, both in and through us. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. I
Amen.
want to I do see you, Brother Sean. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add something to that. When we're making that change, we also got to identify some things that might interfere with the change, because you got to be ready for some interference and some stumbles and roadblocks. And if I don't recognize or point out what some of those barriers could possibly be, when they happen, I won't be prepared for that. And so recognize some of those things that can actually be challenging to the change, and some things that'll let you know when it's working.
Absolutely. In the earlier weeks, we talked about any change that we are making. What is the support that you need, and what are those barriers? Identifying the supports that you need and the barriers that you're going to need to overcome. So with those, again, who are on tonight, we invite those who wish to support KCM Ministries. You can do so by giving on Cash App, which is $KCM Network. We do appreciate your gifts and all that you do to help us continue in the service that we give. We also invite those back on Sunday mornings. We are here live on Facebook. That's every Sunday at 9 a.m. And then we invite you back next week, where we'll be talking about moving from action to maintenance. So that's where we will be next week. We again thank you all for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so very much. Good night. And we're out.